Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. In 1996, under the tutelage of Rupert Murdoch, a right-wing media operative who'd worked for Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and helped create the infamous racist Willie Horton campaign ad for George H.W. Bush, launched a brand new news network that continues to this day to rake in billions and billions of dollars, peddling in racism, sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, and pharmaceutical ads geared toward Grammy and Grampy. The network, Fox News, the man, Roger Ailes. In director Alexis Bloom's new documentary, Divide and Conquer, Ailes' life is dissected, discussed, and his merits as a media genius are debated. Let's take a look.
Roger Ailes.
Roger Ailes.
Roger Ailes.
Roger Ailes, the most powerful man in media. Everyone wanted to be in Roger's sphere.
He was witty and intelligent.
He used to take tap dancing.
Roger was the producer of the Mike Douglas show.
He pulled Nixon into his office. You need a media advisor. What's a media advisor, Roger? I am.
And it worked.
Roger Ailes helped to create 3 Republican presidents.
All these senators and congressmen.
Big Rod.
He was like a kingmaker. He told me this story that when he was a boy, he was on the top bunk and his dad said, jump. And Roger jumped and his father stepped away. And his father said, don't trust anybody.
That story is not true. Roger was invested in creating a myth about who he was. He wanted something like Fox News for years.
Roger knew what fear could do.
He had hemophilia, so he lived his whole life in fear.
Fox News became the #1 cable network.
Everybody has an agenda. He used to say, see what they're after, and then manipulate them.
He used his talent to build something that drove a wedge.
Gotta get you outraged.
The people running the country, he put them there.
She said, Roger is more important than America.
I said, what's next for you? And he said, still have a president to pick.
He liked to pick on the people who needed him. Women were easy targets.
It was about power.
I had a see-through desk. He said, if you want to play with the big boys, you have to lay with the big boys.
There have been plenty of settlements that none of us know about.
Roger Ailes was profoundly paranoid.
I was told Roger has this place bugged.
He carried a gun at all times. He was convinced that Al-Qaeda was trying to kill him.
I think Roger was a kind of genius.
It's easy to make somebody into a monster. It's hard to see that you're on that path too.
Everybody, please welcome the director of Divide and Conquer, the Story of Roger Ailes, Alexis Bloom, and producer Alex Gibney. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for making this incredibly important, timely documentary. Not just because we all have to understand Fox News, but we should really understand the mind behind Fox News, where it came from birth to death, and where we are now. So where did you want to start when it came to telling Ailes' story?
Well, I mean, he has such an enormous scope. You know, his life went from Nixon to Reagan to Bush, H.W. Bush. It's hard to know. We knew we didn't want to do a straightforward sort of chronology, but we knew we had to encompass all the different aspects of his life because they all led him to where he got to finally, which was Fox. But we knew that we were starting, I think, with his ambition and his bombast and his final legacy to us, which was this divisiveness. So we sort of started with that and then peeled it backwards.
Yeah, to the point where the title actually comes from something that he says, something that is referenced that he says in the film, right? Like, the way to win an election or the way to win is to divide the people and then conquer. Or was he quoting someone? Forgive me for not remembering.
He's bathed in battle references. He said divide and conquer. He said a million other things as well. You know, he saw himself as a general, and Fox News was his army, and they're saving America. So he was, nothing if not a quota of a military sort of, military phase. He never was he never served himself, but he saw himself and spoke of himself as a general.
One of the things that I was most fascinated by the film was that I was actually moved by his story, which I never expected that could happen to me, talking about Roger Ailes. You've talked to me in the green room. I think you've seen my perspective on Fox and Ailes. Were you surprised to be moved by his story? Did you expect that going in? Did you want that as a filmmaker?
Everyone is human. You know, we start at that basic premise. Human beings are capable of extraordinary acts of evil and malice, but everyone is human and ordinary. And if he has humanity, it's his fault, because Alex always told me, you know, there's no such thing as bad apples. You know, that idea that there's a bad apple is just too easy and too misleading. Oh, he's a monster, cast him out. There's bad barrels, there's bad systems, there's people who cover up, there's people who facilitate. But this idea that someone is born a monster is just too facile. And honestly, that is Alex. And when I said, you know, it's got to, you know, I'm afraid I'm making him too human. And Alex was like, no, it's good. You know, you've got to embrace that contradiction. It's okay. Because, you know, the left do want to pour scorn on him and make him monstrous. You know, we've got to be careful that we're not, or that the left is not emulating the right in that way, you know, this divisiveness.
Alex, how do you feel about humanizing Roger Ailes? Do you feel like that makes a better story, or do you actually want to see the humanity in someone like Roger Ailes?
I just think it's more accurate. I mean, he is a human being. Like Alexis says, he's capable of monstrous acts, and we don't shy away from those, both in terms of what he did to divide this country by kind of monetizing hate and vitriol, and maybe more accurately, fear, and also by the sexual abuse that he practiced routinely as a way of enforcing his power in some very ugly way. So we don't shy away from any of that. But I think you always make a mistake when you try to imagine that somebody is a monster, that because then they're apart from us. And then if Roger is gone, then everything's okay. But actually, Roger leaves behind a culture at Fox News that is of his DNA, that still remains very much in evidence despite the fact that Roger is gone. And we also know that one of the great things about Roger, or one of the things that made him so potent and powerful, was that he was tremendously charismatic. He had a great sense of humor, and he was a tremendous showman. So that's why he got off. In other words, Fox News became the potent force that it was because it was also very entertaining. You have to then grapple with that and admit that he was, in some ways, a great showman. And I know a lot of people who were completely opposed to him politically who would appreciate him, you know, in a conversation and recognize some of those talents. So I just think it's perilous when you go down that path of thinking he's a bad guy, I'm a good guy, you know, because then you're not really reckoning with how the world works.
Talk about this period of time in Ailes' career, which I didn't know, or at least didn't remember, the America's Talking period, where he creates this network for NBC. It's essentially just a talk radio on television network. And he has his own show, and people even say that he really wanted to be the one that was on TV, which is sort of what you find all the time with news network executives. But talk about this moment where it ends, and then he creates Fox News. It's almost like he becomes a much more bitter person.
Yeah, it's key. It's this sort of little discussed and little understood chapter of his life where he had a channel called America's Talking for 2 years where he was happy. He programmed American fare, but very positive, very upbeat.
Chris Matthews was on it, right?
Chris Matthews was on it. Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly filled in for Roger Ailes on his show. Roger Ailes had this show Straightforward with Roger Ailes, and Bill O'Reilly subbed for him. Yeah. It was like it was a happy. It was launched on July 4th. It was like the patriotic. It was like Fox's happy, upbeat cousin kind of thing. You know, as wrapped in an American flag, but very sunny and upbeat. And the channel was, as he saw it, taken away from him by NBC. They sold it to Bill Gates, and Bill Gates was going to give it a bit more of a news bent. And they said to Roger, this deal is done. We'd like you to stay on, but this is what we're going to do. And he was furious. And he was like, how dare you keep me out of these negotiations? This is my channel. It's my baby. And, you know, stuff you, and I'm out of here.
I'm really glad you went with the British way of doing that.
Right.
My favorite way.
Oh, okay, good. And
You can do the other way too, but I enjoy the British way.
Okay, I sort of caught myself at the last minute. And that was, he had so much personal animus towards NBC. You know, when he launched Fox, it was a giant act of revenge. Self-described. It's not like I'm sort of psychoanalyzing him here. He described it as that. He was like, I'm going to show them, you know, and he beamed the Fox logo onto NBC. He, you know, was obsessed with beating MSNBC in the ratings, you know, much more than CNN. And the personal relationships, I mean, the head of NBC now, Andy Lack, and him got into practically fisticuffs. And Andy Lack won, you know, and then Rupert Murdoch came along and said, I hear you're out of a job. You know, come with me, son. Let's start something of our own. And that was just a few months after. And Roger was like, good, I'm going to show him, you know?
Yeah, and wasn't Ted Turner also, like, thought that he was going to be able to destroy Fox as well?
I mean, Ted Turner has that kind of, you know, cowboy kind of thing. He was like, you know, we're going to crush him like a bug, I think is what he said. Yeah. But, you know, that was kind of show. He didn't have the history that Roger had. Roger had, you know, dinners with all the executives that sort of, as he saw, sort of ousted him. He'd had, you know, meetings with them. He knew them intimately. Ted was just talking from his office kind of about the world at large. But Roger had been very much enmeshed in this other corporate world, and then been, as he saw it, cast out by the elites, by the, you know, the Ivy League coastal elites, and, you know, cast out into the wilderness. And another outsider, Rupert Murdoch, you know, who's Australian, was like, you know, you and me, we can do something here.
Yeah. Talk about the period of time that Ailes and Fox News really made a name for themselves, really made their bones. Because I think in this particular time, and because of the 2016 election and what happened, we're so often looking for moments in time that got us to where we are now. How did it become like this? How did news become like this? How did politics become like this? And it felt to me that in like 1998, 1999, right around the time of the Lewinsky scandal breaking and Fox News figuring out their voice, we see a lot of how we got to where we are now.
I mean, I think the Lewinsky story was central to them. You know, they experienced growth and in their demographic like nothing else before. It was that sort of tabloid TV, but designed to, you know, as Roger said, you know, rile up the crazies. You know, he hated the Clintons in a passionate way, both him and his wife. And it was an opportunity to sort of get back at them and bolster their base and use sort of scandal and sort of degradation as their kind of modus operandi.
Well, shamelessness. Is it fair to say the sort of beginning of just complete shamelessness when it comes to 24-hour news coverage?
I mean, I think everyone was kind of shameless at that time.
Yeah.
Or not?
I mean, let's say
yeah.
it was the properly spoken, it was the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal. And I think that, you know...
Excuse me, did I say the Monica Lewinsky scandal?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I think, you know, what it was a sweet spot for Roger and Fox News because it was about sex. It was about sex, but in the background, it could be about politics. But every time you led with the sex. And so then people are tuning in. It's like, and then they'd get a little bit of politics at the same time. So it was the ultimate twofer. And that's how I think they fine-tuned that mix of how to use salacious material that, or scandalous material, or even a sense of outrage over the smallest thing. I mean, look at how Fox News has been treating the caravan, for example. You know, you take something like that, you blow it up big, you use it as a trope over and over and over again, as Alexis says, to stir up the crazies. So if you want to know where it started, it definitely did start with the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal.
And then it got really ramped up, which the documentary doesn't. I mean, I guess you don't have to go into it because so much of that is kind of covered throughout the years. But the Bush administration and Islamophobia and the terror alerts. I remember being in college and tuning into Fox News and being like, "Oh, we're at Orange Alert now." It looks like, and they were just covering those every day. It's like you said, rile up the crazies.
But when you say cover, I mean, the other thing to remember about Fox News is it's designed to look like a news network, but it's really an entertainment network. And take a look at how they would obsess about the whole birther issue with President Obama. There was no issue about the facts. We all knew the facts, but they would keep hammering at a fiction because it was a fiction that was very appealing for people who didn't like Obama. So it's not about news gathering. It's not about the truth. It's about entertainment.
Therefore, cover is the wrong word, I guess you're saying.
Yeah. But invent, I think, would be better.
But isn't one of the tragedies of Fox News that it is an entertainment channel, but yet because so much attention is devoted to it, it then bleeds into what is supposed to be our actual news channels, what is supposed to be our actual news? So the Caravan, while it starts as a crazy conspiracy on Fox News, then becomes a front page story on the New York Times.
I think that's hugely accurate. And the form of combat that Roger pioneered on television, from the left, from the right, where people are just kind of hammering at each other predictably and needlessly, and where the battle, going back to what Alexis was saying earlier about how he saw himself as a general, the battle was far more important than the issues. So over time, a lot of other networks have, CNN, MSNBC, have taken on that kind of model, that sort of entertainment model. It's the battle that motivates, and that leads us down a dangerous path, because then everybody, if you have a conflict, and Trump's great at this, he says something outrageous and then people say something back, and suddenly you have a controversy, and you cover the controversy. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, really terrible things are being done in terms of actual policy decisions that are having much bigger impact than some, outrageous thing that he happens to have said in the moment.
Alexis, do you see Ailes as a kind of Shakespearean character in a way where he has these outsized ambitions, this huge role in shaping not just media but this country for a period of time, and then has a very stark, not necessarily tragic, but lonely fall?
Yes. I mean, there's so many characters in Shakespeare to choose from, but he has kind of the madness of Richard III and kind of the ambition. It's unending ambition and this sense that he's undone by his own compulsions that he can't control. And in that sense, it's kind of genuinely tragic. He didn't get hit by a car. It's not tragic like that, but it's kind of like the unstoppable train of his own desires will both get him to a place of inordinate success and be his ultimate undoing. And he ends up being defined by the women who he thought he controlled. Right. And there is a real justice, a poetic justice in that. It took a long ass time for it to happen. We spoke to somebody who was harassed by him in 1968. So he'd been behaving pretty badly for decades, but finally, that's what brought him down.
You interview a number of women in the doc who he harassed and outright assaulted. Mm-hmm. What is it like to see the president refer to him as a good man? I don't think he has in a while. He hasn't had the chance to talk about him. But when he was running, when he was campaigning, he would refer to him, he's a great man, like people should leave him alone. And Trump still kind of does that about a number of other people as well.
I mean, I don't think I can say the words on television.
No, you can.
It's like,
you can.
No, you
Here
can.
You can, yeah.
I mean, it's just like this giant moral vacuum, filled with a stench of men who have accrued so much power, that the lack of accountability is, it's jaw-dropping. Yeah. It's jaw-dropping. They are revolting. I mean, it's just revolting. You know, there's no excuse for it. At that level, we can have a conversation about Me Too and, you know, what constitutes appropriate and what constitutes inappropriate. And, you know, there's tons of gray areas. This is not one of them. Like, grab them by the pussy, it's just not one of them. Roger Ailes, you know, getting women who work for him to pleasure themselves with instruments around his office because he was too incapacitated to do stuff himself. It's just not a gray area, you know. It's just not. And it's incredible to me that people can look the other way. That people can say, well, you know, what he's doing is ultimately what we want to be done. So therefore, we'll just ignore this kind of small moral bump.
Did you find any trouble having people talk to you about this, or people who hadn't outright claimed or, you know, accused Ailes of assault, still willing to kind of talk about those things?
Sure, and there are people who to this day won't talk about it. I mean, there's people who can't talk about it because they received money, so they fear that if they talk about it, the money will either get pulled back. I mean, you get fined for talking about it, so you can get fined more than the money that you got. You know, in one conversation, you can get fined. I mean, I think somebody I read their NDA, and it was, you get fined $250,000 every time you break your NDA. So if you're seen to break it, you know, 4 times within a conversation, you can have, you know, spent more than you received. So there's legal reasons, and there's reasons where the people are genuinely intimidated, you know, and they don't want to bring stuff up that they've dealt with, and they're like, you know, why? What's in it? What's in it for me? What am I going to gain? I'm going to get all this attention again. I'm just trying to, you know, carry on with my life. And I think that's the key thing, is that women basically just want to carry on with their lives. And, you know, the women at Fox who were harassed, you know, down to the last one, were told to leave their jobs. So you get harassed or assaulted, and then you're like, all right, you know, you either get a settlement or you don't, but either way, you leave your job, and you can never apply for a job there again in your life, and you can never apply to any one of the affiliates of 21st Century Fox. So that, to me, is like incredibly punitive. That's the one thing I was pretty surprised by. I knew there was an NDA about not talking, but I had no idea that, like, you had to leave your job and you had to agree, like, don't worry, guys, like, I'll never come near you again. You know, it seems odd.
And we should say the harassment didn't just stop at Ailes. It was kind of a trickle down, and Fox News as a whole kind of was this cabal of sexual harassment where you had people like Bill O'Reilly, you had Bill Shine as a top executive who's now working in the administration, but it was all over the place and rampant in Fox.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Shine never had a charge leveled against him personally, but he certainly covered up for people. There was the head of Fox Business had a case brought against him that was settled. But, you know, the cover-up was the really interesting thing. You know, the number of people, as you say, it was fairly widespread, so you had to have a whole machine, you know, covering this shit up, basically.
Yeah, this is where you had the case of the rotten barrel as opposed to the one bad apple.
But this one bad apple created the barrel.
Yeah, I mean, he did. He set the tone and created the context, or created the culture that allowed this abuse to happen over years and years and years.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about this and we talk about Roger Ailes' beliefs, I'm always struck by people like Ailes who say that that accuse others of not being real Americans, of not being patriotic enough and not supporting America enough, when it's so clear that Ailes and his acolytes only love an America that works specifically for them and their class, and that anybody else is simply needs to be at their whims and should be powerless in front of them. That's all. I don't have a question. Sorry. But I am kind of curious. One question that I do have is that, were you surprised that Ailes was a believer in everything that he peddled? I was, because I always thought of Ailes as like a smart con man who knew how to sell this stuff. But nearing the end of his life, he was very much a believer in all of the fear that he was peddling.
He was deeply, deeply paranoid. You know, that was he was deeply paranoid. I don't know whether he believed everything on Fox News, but it was certainly damn close. And he was, unfeasibly paranoid to an extent that to me is surprising that he could have carried on in his capacity as head of a major corporation. I've said this before, but we have, more stringent kind of mental health guidelines for our interns, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one of the last sort of speeches that you see Ailes give nearing the end of his career is not the most well-spoken, I have to say. Alex?
No, I was just going to say that, very often some of the worst crimes are committed by people who believe in some high ideal. So Ailes believed that he represented some larger, greater good in America. And I think psychologically that gave him a certain license, not only to do the things that he did on Fox News in terms of programming, particularly in terms of monetizing the fear and the hate, but also in terms of what he did in his personal life and how he allowed that kind of sexual abuse to continue. It's okay, I'm Roger Ailes, I'm doing something good. It's
I'm
okay
a great
if I'm
patriot.
a little bit bad.
We have time for a couple questions. What do we have for a question? Right here, hi.
Hi. So obviously Roger Ailes died in May of 2017, I believe, and so there's kind of been a changing of the guard at Fox News with the new CEO, and so I'm wondering if you think that because, as we've also heard, Fox and Friends, supposedly, there's this book of things they get in the morning, and those are the stories they're supposed to cover for the day. And so I was wondering if you think that in the future, the future of Fox News, and if you think this changing of the guard is possibly going to influence what they talk about, or if they're just going to stick to their classic format because it's been working.
I mean, the person who's replaced Ailes is a woman called Suzanne Scott, who trained under him for decades. So she's by all accounts a disciple. I don't think that there will be, a sort of notable shift. If I mean, their key goal is don't lose your audience, and they have not lost their audience. Their numbers are absolutely robust. The most watched cable news station during the midterms. So everyone there has been taught that, right or wrong, fact or no fact, don't lose your audience. And I think as long as there are people who are his, groomed in his generation sort of thing there, they'll continue as best they can in his mold. That's my...
Yeah, I mean, that's why divide and conquer is still a business model that works very much. And by the way, it's a business model that long before was endorsed by Rupert Murdoch in the United Kingdom. And Murdoch, I think, let's not forget that, on top of Ailes sat Murdoch, and his publications, and I think also Fox News, very much profited by making sure that they knew what their audience wanted and they would keep giving it to them. That's not really a good plan for a news organization, because if you happen to uncover a bit of news that doesn't please your audience, well, then your audience migrates away. So you feed them whatever it is that they want.
I wonder if you think that Fox has sort of started to eat its own tail, though, in the sense that in order to maintain this audience, they've had to double down and get kind of crazier and crazier and crazier. And you look at the kind of stuff that Tucker Carlson is putting on his 8 o'clock show, which is essentially the white nationalist hour at this point, and is peddling in wild conspiracies. And we're seeing people shooting up churches. We're seeing people going out and doing things in the name of these conspiracies that Fox News has started to peddle. Are we seeing Fox, like the Republican Party, become a kind of snake that eats its own tail? You reap what you sow.
Well, I think it becomes a very pernicious force. I'm not sure it's eating its own tail in the sense that seems to suggest that they're destroying themselves. My greater fear is that what they're doing is actually fanning the flames of hate and misguided prejudice. Well, I don't know if you can have misguided prejudice in ways that really have real life consequences, that the entertainment then spills out into the real world, and we see devastating life and death consequences. That, I think, is a fact.
Next question.
Hi. So, as you mentioned before, there's a lot to cover with Roger Ailes' life, and so I was wondering, how did you choose to choose which moments to specifically focus on, and is there anything that you couldn't include in the documentary that you would have liked to include?
I mean, I just bore you senseless if I told you exactly the rationale for like the stuff we didn't include. There was stuff we didn't include just because you can't be an encyclopedia. The stuff that hit the floor. Roger Ailes dressed as Fidel Castro with a live chicken under his arm. We tried to put that footage somewhere, and it was so
Footage
strange.
of it?
Yeah. Amazing. I can pass it along. Maybe we should just put it on YouTube.
I think so.
Yeah, it was on the Stanley Siegel show, and it's bizarre. What else? Anecdotes, tons of anecdotes where we just couldn't, Glenn Beck gave an amazing interview, so did Alison Camerota. We couldn't use all of their stuff. Alison Camerota describing how her cell phone was monitored, that she'd made plans to meet somebody at a restaurant, somebody who'd fallen out of favor with Roger, had been previously a friend and had fallen out of favor, and she was meeting them on a Friday in a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, and she was called into a senior executive's office. I keep on thinking it's Bill Shine, but to say, if I was you, I wouldn't go to that restaurant on Friday. And she was like, oh, and he was like, I hear the food isn't very good. And it was this sort of thinly veiled kind of, warning that meeting this person was not a good idea. And she knew, she hadn't sort of publicized the fact she was meeting this person, but she was like, the only way they would have known is by reading my cell phone. So surveillance things, Glenn Beck also talks about surveillance. Glenn Beck had great stories, about Roger's sort of duplicitousness, about finding the brain room in Fox underneath where he has all these hackers and kind of sort of detectives doing the black ops, stuff like that. More stuff about the hot girls on Fox websites, which I got kind of very entranced by. That it's like one thing to put the hot girls on Fox, and it's another thing to kind of pimp them out as per the management who are creating these websites saying, look at our babes.
Wait, the management was creating those websites?
Yeah, I'm going to get sued here because nobody's ever proved it. But
Because
there was
excuse me, that's not necessarily in the doc that the management is creating those
No,
sites,
there is. Alison Camerota talks about it. There's websites that are created by a third party,
right?
A company that is run by a colleague and friend of Roger Ailes', who was doing also other work for him. So the IP is traced back to this person, and this person denies having done it. He goes, I don't know who at my company was doing that. It wasn't me. But simultaneously, he was doing a whole bunch of other work for Fox. So it sort of seems odd that he wouldn't know what was going on in his own company. Nobody's bothered suing him because I think, frankly, the women who were who had their photos put on the website and stuff just kind of wanted to go away and, forget about it. But that was, this guy was on the Fox payroll, the guy who had the website domain company, and yeah.
Next question.
Hi, this is an online question from our website. Max would like to know, where do you guys get your news?
Fox Nation.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, one of the useful, there's a lot that's not useful about Twitter, but one of the useful things I find about Twitter is that it ends up being a kind of a news feed. So, every day I scroll through and see stories recommended from all over the place, so that it's not like I automatically go to one place and that's all I read. It's a great recommending engine, which is kind of what I like about it. And then and once I've gone one place, I make sure I'm following, and then it shows up in my feed.
I'm the opposite. I'm not on Twitter, and it overwhelms me, and that's why Alex is better informed. No, I think I just go to the regular mainstream news. I mean, New York Times, I try to read, LA Post, I read the magazines, I read the New Yorker, I read the Atlantic, I check in with Fox. I go to the right, every so often I go to InfoWars just to scare myself.
It's fun to check in with the right. I will say I check in with Breitbart and InfoWars and Fox. And
yeah,
it's a good time. It's a good show. One hell of a
I was
goddamn
dipping
show.
into Tucker Carlson. I found at some point I've now had to avert my eyes. Like it's gone so far beyond the pale.
Can you listen though? I find when I listen, I actually have been closing my eyes, but then it's worse. He's in your head.
Yeah. No, I don't like him in my head.
I can't watch the conservative networks. I can like read the articles or just sort of see what they're peddling. InfoWars I can watch a few minutes of because that is just pro wrestling at its craziest. It's not even normal pro wrestling. Guys, I love the doc. Congratulations and phenomenal work. It's a story that absolutely had to be told, and I'm sure there's more we're going to learn about him as the years go on too. I'm sure there's more secrets about Ailes.
It's opening tomorrow in theaters nationwide, and it'll be streaming also.
Yeah, so all platforms. So however you want to see it, in the theater, at home, on your computer, tomorrow. Go see it.
And absolutely
Tell a
see it.
friend.
It is definitely a must watch. It's Divide and Conquer: The Story of Roger Ailes. Everybody give a big round of applause for Alexis Bloom and Alex Gibney. Let's hear it.